Hello, my dears. This is your favorite purple lady, Amethyst Lady, back again with another Legends of Runeterra video. Today we are going to do a deep dive into the makings of my favorite deck to run, which I've called Bleed for Me. I want to rework this deck, so I've called upon Bedtimebuddy and Omegastryfe, both platinum ranked players, to help me out. Before we begin, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up and smash the subscribe button for more awesome gaming content. The format was done so you feel like you're right there with us as we go through the cards in each video. Let's get right into it. Next card, Crimson Aristocrat.
All right, so who wants to go first here?
I'll go first. All right, so I like this card. This card has the ability to prompt the other cards that when they take damage, they gain from it. Also, it gives them +2 to their attack. That has been great for me so many times. I like having 3 of them in the deck. I already run 3 Unscarred Reavers. One of my most powerful openings is when I get the Unscarred Reaver and the Crimson Aristocrat. It's so good because majority of the time the opponent elects to just take the damage straight to the nexus points, and it makes me feel good. So yeah, I love where it is. I think it's a great addition in this deck. So yeah, that's my take.
I think part to me goes directly to the cons of this card, which is if you don't have the Unscarred Reaver, which you only have 3 of the 1-cost cards, and then let's say you have one of these in your starting hands, part of me goes directly to the cons, which is if you don't have another unit, then you either don't want to play it, or you're playing a straight up just turn 2/2/2.
And which is not a bad stat line.
And then it brings me back to the pros of this card, which is a turn 2/2/2 isn't the worst thing, because there's a lot of either
turn 1s,
1/1s,
right?
Turn 1s, 2/1s, or turn 2, 3/2s, or whatever the case.
The turn 1/1/3s will be the issue. So like the
guys
that go in the Yasuo deck,
right.
the guys that go in the barrier decks.
But the Yasuo cards that squirrel is a turn 2, 1/3.
Okay.
And so I think that even in the worst case scenarios, that you don't get that ideal scenario, and you don't have a turn 2 or possibly a turn 3 play, and so you're like, let me get something on the board. Worst case scenario, you do get a 2/2 body on the board that can trade into healthy, like turn 1 drops, and keep you healthy enough to get into your deck on turns 3 through 5. And so I think with the fact that you are trying to damage your units but keep them alive for the Vladimir, I think this having 3 of is just a staple. So I think I'm in agreement with what you currently have, which is 3 of this Crimson.
Yeah, I think that always in most card games, like dropping a stat line on curve that is in sync with the turn or greater if the stats are greater than the turn. Like we'll talk about the turn 5/5/8 later. Is usually a very high value drop. Granted, in the early game right now, and in this game, you know, if you're facing Shadow Isles by this turn, you might be dealing with a 3/2 and a 4/4.
Yeah.
If you're facing the Yasuo deck, then you might have a 1/3.
Mm-hmm.
If you're facing Fiora Shen, then you might have a turn 1/1/3 and something else on the board. If you're facing an Elusive, then you might have the 2/1, and which you also don't want to trade into. So there's a lot of things that realistically could be on the board at this drop that you wouldn't want this to trade into, and which also kind of it extends its reach into the Unscarred Reaver start, because if you power up your Unscarred Reaver and it's a 5/2, you may not want to trade into that 2/1 or that 2/2 that's waiting for you on the other side and stuff like that. So I think those things are worthy of thought when it comes to the early, like playing it in the early game. And the late game, in my opinion, is when it gets really interesting, because you get really huge power spikes when you buff the turn 3/2/4, or if you buff the Scar Mother late game, or pretty much anybody, giving someone an additional 2 attack might be enough to put you over, in exchange make your opponent play a card first, so that way you can be reactive as opposed to proactive and burn all your mana into denies and stuff like that. So this is another card that I'm kind of on the fringe of if or not it's a 3 of, because I feel like 3 of cards should be absolute staple cards that you must have in your hand at all times, I think this card does have a lot of different ways to play it. But the event where you're trying to, like, you don't have anything already on the board, or again, like I said, if you have the Unscarred Reaver and then you try to power her up, she goes up to a 5/2, and now you're afraid to trade, or you're afraid to attack with your big beefy Unscarred Reaver because your opponent will block with like a 1/2 or something close to that stat line, and then you don't get the value of your 5 attack anyway. Kind of gives me a little bit of reserve. So I'm on the fringe about it being a 3 of. I might be leaning a little more towards a 2 of, but I'm not mad at it being a 3 of.
So the only one thing that I want to correct is that when you do power up the Unscarred Reaver, that'll be a 3/2, not a 5/2.
Yeah.
But even in the ideal situation where you drop the Unscarred Reaver on turn 1 and you drop the Crimson Aristocrat on turn 2, you have a 3/2 and you have a 2/2. And then you start thinking about the Shadow Isle start. That's the strong start, where they either start with the 1/1 summon a Spiderling, and then they also summon the 3/2, or they summon the turn 2 Keeper with the Butcher.
Yeah.
And they have a 4/4 and a 3/2
and a 1/1
and a 2/2.
If they're
and they summon a 1/1
Yeah.
as well. Like, that's the strong start. And I think that this matches pretty well because you would have a 5/2 and a 2/2. So the 5/2 could obviously trade into the 4/4 and a 2/2 into the 3/2.
Well, we just established it would be a 3/2, not a 5/2.
But you're right. So the 3/2. All right. So but either way, I think
No,
the 2/2.
I think it would be a 4/2. How much does Unscarred Reaver go up by? Is it by 3 or by 2?
Unscarred Reaver goes up.
No, you're right. It would be a 5/2. I'm
Yeah, it
sorry.
would be a 5/2.
Yeah, it would be a 5/2.
So you would be able to trade with the 4/4
Exactly. So I think
as
most
well
of
as
us,
the 3/2.
from my experience, I felt like Shadow Isles, when they have a Keeper and they summon a Butcher, that's one of the strongest starts that someone could possibly have. And I think this matches that pretty much 1-for-1.
I think it's one of the strongest starts it can have, due in most to the fact that there's a 4 health minion on the board.
Yes.
And here you're dealing with two health minions. So there's a little more available counterplay out there at this stage of the game.
There is. But I also think that as we get through the deck, we'll understand that the mid-range of this deck is stronger
That's where the strength of the deck
than
is.
the Shadow Isles mid-range, where the Shadow Isles late game might be better than this one, but the mid-range of this deck might be stronger. But I think in terms of starts,
Yeah.
this matches pretty well to probably the strongest
Yeah, this
starts.
is obviously one of the better ways to start a game. So, okay, we can go to the next card.
Alright, let's go to the next one. The next card is Crimson Disciple.
This is a very interesting card.
It is.
It has a good stat line.
Yeah, I like the
It
stat.
has a
line.
great
Like
stat
the
line
stat
for turn 2.
So, for me, I think because of the fact that you have so many ways to deal 1 damage to this card,
Right.
it becomes pretty important to the card because of the fact that this deck is tailored towards a mid-range type deck where you want to get a lot of your power spike between like turns like 3 to 7,
Right.
sort of ish, and that's also when you're proccing your Darius. And I think that if you're helping your Darius become a 10/5 on a turn 6 drop, if you do have this Darius on your hand, this Crimson Disciple not only trades well into a lot of whether it's a turn 1, a turn 2, 2/1,
Like a
last
Spiderling.
breath, a Spiderling turn 2.
It'll freeze the Spiderlings. They won't be able to attack at all.
It trades so well into a lot of turn 1s and 2s that I'd say 70 or 80% of your play, your games, this will trade favorably against turn 1 and 2 drops that your opponent is dropping.
Yeah.
And then you're also able to proc its effect because of the cards you have in your deck. I think it's a great card. It goes well with Vlad. It goes well with the other cards, and it helps you proc your Darius mid-game. I think this is a great card. I would say this is a 3 of because a 2/3 turn 2 is great to drop regardless.
So you don't think that the deck would need more direct damage in order to optimize the presence of this card in the deck as opposed to some other type of 2-drop, maybe like a Challenger or something along those lines?
I don't, just because with the death lotuses, and we'll get into that, and the avalanches, and the other cards that do damage, and then the opponent's turn 1s and 2s, that usually doesn't have 3 damage, I think this is a great card. I think there's a reason why it's a rare. My inclination would be that this is a 3 of in this deck.
I can respect it.
Okay. Yeah, my thing is that I only had 2 of them. And the main reason I was saying or thinking that it should only be 2 is because usually by the time I get this card, like I could use Blaze Edge into like some of my other like higher stat line pulls from the deck by the time this card actually like
Reaches your hand.
reaches my hand.
But that may be due in part to the fact that it's currently a 2 of.
That could be true. So, I mean, the only other thing I would think of is like the Crimson Aristocrat paired with the Unscarred Reaver. I think I was looking more so toward that pairing.
Being
the early pairing instead of like the Crimson Disciple. But, you know, I'm open to making it a 3 of if there's a good enough argument for
The thing is that you won't always have your best possible start. So what's the next best thing?
True.
And you would be looking at turns 2 to 3. You would stock mana on turn 1 if you don't pick up an Unscarred Reaver, which is just enough for you to toss a Blade's Edge if necessary. But say if you had the Crimson Aristocrat and the Crimson Disciple, once again, we talk about the Shadow Isles, you'd be able to turn her into a 4/2, and you still have your 2/2 stat line on the other minion that can trade with the 3/2.
And you dealt 2 damage.
And you got a little bit of value with the 2 damage direct on the other side. Not to mention, depending on how the matchups are lining up, say if you're fighting against an Elise deck and you're blocking spiders, you're going to get additional damage. And then at that point, you start considering if you want to use take card on this thing because it's going to be trading into spiders all day.
That's true.
I can respect the thought of it being a 3 of. The concern would be how many other 3 ofs do we have in the deck, because then we're going to start prohibiting ourselves from getting to the Unscarred Reavers and all of that other stuff. But it is still early game. It's a supplementary strong start. It's not the best start, but it's up there. It's like about as good as it can get with your pairing.
With this deck type, yep.
Yeah, and it has mid-game synergy, and it has a little bit of late-game synergy too. When you need to push off a little bit, like 4 damage onto your opponent, you have a Blade's Edge or somebody weak that you could have her match up with. You'll be able to kind of get that last little bit of damage off. Maybe you attack with Vladimir. Vladimir does a bunch of damage with his effect, and you get an additional 2 from her. If your opponent has like 5 or 6, that might be enough for you to win the game without anything, just by you sending them to attack. You won't even need the battle, just the fact that they went to attack. And that's not including your overwhelms. So there's a lot for the opponent to have to deal with. So as a matter of fact, the more that I kind of run it through my head, the more it makes sense for her to be a 3-0.
Especially her pairing with Vladimir, because of the fact that Vlad will do 1 damage to the enemy Nexus, and then also do 1 damage to her, and then so her attacking with Vlad is 3 damage.
And that's
already.
Just if it's just them 2.
Just them 2. And I think that's the reason that Vlad and her have a dialogue when they're summoned together.
Yeah.
Is because of the fact that it works so well in synergy when they attack. Because you're already going to get 3 damage to the enemy Nexus, regardless, unless they have a deny to deny the Vlad's effect. Like, they have to waste 3 mana for 0 mana that you spent towards that effect. And I just think that a turn 2, 2, 3, when we're valuing the health of a unit more so than the damage or attack power that they have, I think that you would feel comfortable dropping her on turn 2. If you don't draw Unscarred Reaver and you only have her on turn 2, you would still feel comfortable dropping her on turn 2 and feeling good about your sort of early game situation because you got a 2-3 on the board.
Right.
Fair.
The question is, at this point,
1 second.
do we feel like we're competing with elusive drops? If they start turn 1 with Green Blade Duo and you bouncing Blade, this will be your best case scenario. And then turn 2 comes and you don't have anyone for Aristocrat. Say you drop Disciple raw, and then say if they pass over their turn 2 or they drop another Green Glade Duo, then on turn 3, they drop the Shadow Seeker,
Right.
and then they pick up a card, and now they have 2 elusives on the board. And the Green Glade Duo went up to a 3/1. So you have a 3/1 and a 2/2, so you're about to take 5 damage. Are you okay with the damage you will be returning on your turn if that's the start that you're up against? Because at this juncture, unless, like, depending on how many culling strikes you end up running, you won't have any hope of removing that Green Glade Duo or that Shadow Seeker.
Mm-hmm.
So that would actually, if you do decide to upgrade her to 3 of, you're actually increasing the value of you running more culling strikes to be able to remove those elusive units. But then again, the culling strikes that you would put in would still have counterplay, because you would have to worry about twin dragons, I think it's called, or twin disciplines.
Yeah.
You'd have to worry about twin disciplines, and then they just raise their attack by 3 temporarily, and then your culling strike misses.
Yeah, then it's useless. So.
Yeah. So I'm cool with this card. You can do a lot of things to kind of like play around, but I'm just not sure at this point, when we're getting into turn 3 and we're matched up against elusives and what you're going to see the most.
Yeah.
How are we contending? How are we getting them off the board? What's the game plan to get them off the board? I don't think we should arrive at turn 4 without a game plan to deal with elusive units.
Okay. I mean, that's definitely fair. Because elusive units are definitely an issue right now.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see like your thought process with that. I didn't think with my deck I would have issues with elusive units, but they have been troubling, and maybe that's part of the reason why. Like, maybe I need a better plan for that.
And that's the thing, right? Like, sometimes when you're battling against elusive, typically they don't want to block you with their elusive units because they're there to be able to hit you in the face without interaction.
Right.
So you want to force them to interact with your characters, and they're not great blockers because they don't have the best stat lines. But if your board isn't powerful enough to mandate that they block you, they're just going to ignore you. So are we getting enough value out of these early drops? We'd have to play test it, right?
Right.
Are we getting enough value out of these early drops to sway these elusive users from just ignoring your units? Are you putting out more damage per turn? If they pushed out 5 damage to you, are you able to threaten 7 on your turn? If they pushed out 5, 6, 7, 8 on their following turn, are you able to threaten with 10? So that would be like the most natural way of dealing with them if you're unable to remove them, is to create a board that mandates that they have to block you, and then go from there.
Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you watch the next video in this series and join in the discussion by leaving a comment below. Like, subscribe, and take care, my dears. Bye!